Hi, so today we're here with Trauma Talks, Chuck and Bricks, our session two on what do we think about the world and how does our brain work and take in all the stuff that's going on. And we're going to talk about automatic thinking today, which is something we're just really good at doing. It's very quick, it's a judgment call, it's intuition, it's assumptions, how we should behave in any given situation. We have different parts of our brain and things that happen to us. One of them is schemas, and they're built from childhood on up. Our experiences are put into a little file cabinet in our brain that we can access very quickly to know how to behave when we walk into different places or when we meet different people. There's different parts of our brain that we use. The front part of our brain is the prefrontal lobe. That part of the brain is used for problem solving and different things like that. So when we're in that part of our brain, we are actually thinking, what are we learning from this and what can we do about it? That's the part of the brain where we do all of our problem and critical thinking, and we want our children to get that. That part of the brain isn't usually fully developed till about 24, age 24 and 25. But as parents, we need to give our kids those skills so they're able to do that. Prior to that, we live mostly in our amygdala, which is the emotional part of our brain, where everything that happens to us, we are dealing with it in the situation, and we say to ourselves, how does that make me feel? So when you see a toddler having a tantrum, throwing themselves on the floor, they're in their amygdala, and we have our fight or flight, which is just natural instinct and survival. So we can be living in those parts of our brains. When you see an adult have a tantrum, when I have an anger flare up and I don't know how to manage it because I am just very anxious and upset and I'm not in that front part of my brain. I'm not thinking, I'm not problem solving, I'm reacting. And so we do that a lot because we're on automatic pilot, especially children of abuse and neglect. We've learned to live in that part of our brain. We have not developed the prefrontal part of our brain to problem solve very well. And even at 25, we probably aren't there. We're still living with a 14 or 15-year-old's brain where we're just responding to most everything with emotion through our amygdala. So, what if we actually think about a different approach, like Rodin's statue, the thinker, and we actually problem solve and use that prefrontal cortex slowly and deliberately working through the problems that we have. I think about our automatic thinking and how good it is for us when we are in different situations. So you're introduced to a bunch of new people. You're not going to go out and leave the room and think about it and contemplate who they are for an hour. We're going to use our automatic thinking and pull that information out of that we've built with schemas in our file cabinet and be like, okay, maybe I can relate that to, oh, they're my cousin, they're a family member, they're a police officer, they're a doctor, they're a teacher, and we relate it to situations that we already know, and we can make that decision very fast. We know what to do. We have a whole history of experiences to relate it to. So it doesn't have to be exhausting. And it wouldn't be very effective for us to sit down and think for an hour about a person. We will learn about them as we move on. Our automatic thinking is actually needed very much in certain circumstances. It's a good tool to have to be able to respond very quickly to situations. But we also have to use that prefrontal part of our brain to problem solve and make decisions. And I think a lot of times when people are in trauma, we don't get to that part of our brain. So thankfully, we do form impressions really quickly, and we do this by engaging in an automatic analysis of our environment. We just know we can walk into McDonald's or Hardee's or wherever cafe you want, the Millstone, and you know what you're supposed to do. You don't go to McDonald's and sit down at the tables and wait for someone to wait on you. They don't, right? We know to go to the counter. That's all been built into our schemas through experiences. It's all that automatic thinking. We just do it because we know. Okay. It helps us understand new situations by relating them to past experiences. We make that quick judgment of who they are, what their place is in our life, if we like them or not, if they're good people or bad people. We even call upon our experiences. So somebody you know could have told you 2 months ago that so and so is not a very nice person. So when you meet them the first time, you're going to pull that schema out of your brain, and that priming is another thing we're going to talk about. And you're going to make an assumption about them just because you have that already built into you. We do that for places and objects also. Like I said, when we walk into a fast food restaurant or we go for a job interview, anything that we do, we are pulling information from our schemas to decide how to behave. Our schemas are actually mental structures that organize our knowledge about the social world. Okay, so over our whole lifetime, we have built schemas, what we believe about the world, what we believe about ourselves, and how we interact with that world. There's a lot of influence in that information that we notice, we think, and remember. Our schemas contain the basic knowledge and impressions we have about the world. An example could be, let's say when you were a kid, you lived in a home where the police were called often, or welfare checks, or parents were selling drugs, or you saw one of your parents be arrested. You're going to have a schema about what you believe about police because maybe you heard your mom and dad say, oh, call them dirty names. And every time they got arrested, they'd say negative things like, them damn cops would stay out of our lives. So you probably have a schema about what police are like and if they're safe and if you like them or if they're bad people. Schemas actually help us organize and make sense of our world and fill in the gaps for new experiences. Can you imagine if we didn't have a schema and everything we encountered was inexplainable, confusing, and unlike anything else we've ever encountered? It would be really hard to navigate quickly through our world because we have to build that new schema that we could draw from, right? It's a big file cabinet. Just so here's an example of a schema being used and maybe some priming. And priming is influences that come from all over the place that tell you what to think and what to believe. So, what if you're riding on a bus? There's an old guy who gets on and he's singing and swaying. Um, he's singing an old Nirvana song, muttering incoherently to himself, and just swaying back and forth. Your brain may think, alcohol, mental health, is he addicted to drugs? How will you decide what you think? That's what we're talking about today. The schema that comes to mind for you and guide your impression will be what's the most accessible to your brain at the moment. So whatever's on the top of your brain or even thinking about or learning about or doing recently is probably going to be the first thing you connect them to. So let's say you're on that bus, but you came from visiting someone you love at treatment. That's going to be the newest schema. So you might assume right away, because it's accessible, that that person is high on drugs. It's in the forefront of your mind. That's the one we're going to use most likely to make judgment calls on people. Let's say if you have lived experiences related to addiction, your schema will probably relate his behavior again to that negative light of, oh, just another junkie. Let me move over. I don't want to be around him or whatever you think. When you have a lot of emotion about a particular topic, your schema is going to be actually more active and in the forefront of your brain. So if you just got done visiting someone at treatment, or maybe you have an addiction problem yourself, you are going to go into that, pull that out of your file cabinet, your schema, and make your judgment, your quick decision, your automatic thinking will come from that part of your brain. So whatever's most accessible is what we're going to do. So something can actually be more accessible because it's an active goal or something happening to us right now in the present. Maybe you have no experience with mental illness, but you're currently actually reading a book about it. Maybe you have to write a paper, you're in college. Schemas can also be temporarily accessible because of a current experience of something we're going through, we're thinking about or doing. Let's say right before that man got on the bus, you were leaning, looking out the window, and you've seen somebody leaning against the wall drinking out of a brown paper bag. That would be a very accessible schema that just happened, that's temporary, that just made you think about it right now. So we would access that and probably make an assumption about that person with our automatic thinking. Your brain would be, it's called priming when you see things and it's on the top of your list. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but Jean Piaget was actually a leader in schemas. He was fascinated by how a child's mind is developed and what makes them be who they are. So imagine that mental file cabinet where we store some of our information, our experiences. But think about this. What is your schema on dogs? Do you believe dogs are good and friends of people, or do you believe they're bad and evil and you're scared of them? Where did your schema come from that gave you that thinking about a dog. Our schemas work the same way. The experiences we have, no matter what it is, no matter what situation, get built. Think about the game of peekaboo. As an infant, children are learning about face schemas and what a smile, happy face means, what a mad face means, what a scared face means. Those are all schemas, which are experiences that get tucked into our brains and saved. And the more we have experiences that are the same, the more we believe that that is the truth about our world. So our automatic thinking also contains automatic goal pursuits. When we set a goal for ourselves, maybe a career, we do it thoughtfully and carefully. What is the goal we want to achieve and how do we get there? That's not always true of goals of everyday life. Some goals we have can be conflicting. Our behavior or what we want and what we actually do doesn't match up. And I like to use divorce a lot of times because you see this happening where couples get divorced and their intent is to get along and do what's best for the children. But because of situations that happen and emotions and being in their amygdala, what does it make me feel instead of being in their prefrontal lobe of what am I learning and what can I do? They end up using their children to punish each other, take away visits or make things difficult, make the kids mad at the other parent, tell them bad things. And when you're doing that, you're in your amygdala, that emotional part of your brain, and you're actually creating schemas for your children. Those schemas could be that the parent who's talking bad about the other parent is a bad person. It could be that the other parent is a bad person. And thinking about what you want for the future of your children, being very careful of where you're at in your brain when you are making some of those decisions. Those should be thought about longer and harder and not be a part of that automatic thinking. So let's move on to some influences that could be priming to us. Let's say you're leaving a store one day and a stranger approaches you and says, "Hey, my purse was stolen. Can you give me some money so I can get home on the bus?" How do you respond? Will you help them or not? When people are faced with these ambiguous things, we rely on our schemas to help us decide and if we've been primed prior. So let's say prior to being outside when you were waiting in line, the clerk and the person in front of you, she had some problems, and the clerk went out of their way to be helpful and kind. So you would have been primed. So when you got outside, your last thought might have been of how nice that clerk was. So when this lady approaches you, you would probably be like, "Yeah, sure, here's a few bucks," because you had experienced kindness prior. So you're more apt to respond with kindness because of the priming that was done. If your schema um, had something negative, oh, maybe you're hungry or you're tired, we really react to our emotions in our body. So, what if also you were told that your decisions, your priming, can be based on what you just smelled? Something fresh and clean, especially that has been shown that it actually, anything smelling clean in the store makes us happier and more willing to be kind and help other people. So it turns out our schemas can not only be primed, but they can be influenced. Our minds are connected to our bodies. So when we think about someone or something, we need to pay attention to what's going on in our body and how it's reacting to. Sometimes it's really straightforward and we just feel ill and sick, or we can feel the anxiety and the emotions rise up in us when we think about certain people. Sometimes we just need to take a step back, get out of our amygdala, our emotion part of our brain, and move into that prefrontal lobe, be purposeful. Listen to your self talk, listen to what your body's doing, and react differently. We also use a lot of mental shortcuts, another form of automatic thinking where we apply specific rules and shortcuts to how we actually think about our world. If we need to make a quick decision, we may rely on the social media posts, friends, the comments they make, anything like that to solve our problems. Quick judgments based on only what we think we know. We don't take the time to research the topic, conducting that deeper research in order to make an informed decision. And many times when that happens, our information and our knowledge and our schemas are actually flawed and ineffective and not thought out. This bias is one reason political parties try to reach us prior to voting. They want to be the last person to talk to us. New information can actually change our minds as to what is most important because it's the most accessible information when we make a decision. And it's closest to the top in our file cabinets. It's easiest to get to. We base our judgment on ease of access many times, even when it's flawed. This availability can actually lead to flawed decision miscalculations and overreactions to risk and to problems. It causes us to be inaccurate in our perceptions of ourselves and others. We can have biases in decision making when we're in the middle of something very emotional. So think about, here's an example if you want to go try it. So you're watching the news. Let's say you only watch CNN or you only watch Fox, one or the other. I want you to actually go and watch the other station for 10 minutes. Pay attention to your mind, what your self-talk is saying to you, and what your body's doing. Because if you are very against one or the other, when you're watching it, your brain's going to be screaming at you. You're going to feel the tightness and anxiety in your body. We have been primed to believe certain things, and we hear things that are not a part of our schema, our body's going to react. So our body really keeps track of stuff that's going on. I challenge you to go back and forth, feel those emotions, but get in the prefrontal part of your brain, not the amygdala, because when it's happening and you're having all those emotions, you're in the emotional part of your brain, and all you're doing is thinking, how does this make me feel? It makes me mad. It makes me scared. It makes me whatever. Can you get into that prefrontal lobe where you can say, what am I learning? And what can I do about it? Figure out what really pisses you off and then work on that for any situation. If you're dealing in any kind of trauma in your life, domestic violence, there's just so many things that be going on in people's lives. We need to start using and moving into that prefrontal part of our brain. So remember, the prefrontal is what am I learning? What can I do about it? And the amygdala is how does this make me feel? Am I safe? Is there danger? It's very emotional. That's the part we live in when we're children, teenagers, and young adults. It's a good part of our brain. We need it. We do. But we want to be in the prefrontal lobe most of our lives, especially if we're dealing with problems that cause us a lot of anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, domestic anger. You need to learn to get your brain into the prefrontal because that will save you a lot of painful mistakes. So representative heuristics is we want to see, hear, and be around things and people that agree with us and make us feel good. That's just a natural part of the human condition. It's actually called the Barnum effect if you want to look it up and read more about it. So I have a question for you I want you to answer. I'm going to read a statement to you. At times, I have serious doubts as to whether I made the right decisions or have done the right thing. So, have you ever thought that? When you do think it, what do you do about it? We find that people and information that tells us we are right, we want in our lives. We want to be around people we agree with. But there's so many times, especially when we're living in that emotional part of our brain, that when we have serious doubts about ourselves, if we made the right decision or did the right thing, we're only going to go talk to people that we know will tell us we're right and encourage our behavior. We're not going to talk to the people we know will disagree with us and tell us we could have been better or done better or said better. We are very much a human population that doesn't want to be wrong, has a hard time apologizing, and has a hard time listening to information that doesn't match up with our schemas. And so always be questioning, what you really know. Remembering controlled thinking. Okay, that part prefrontal cortex of our brain. When we're in that part of our brain, it's because we're consciously choosing to be there. So it's very intentional. It's voluntary. We want to be there, and it's effortful. It takes work. It's not easy. You have to catch yourself. You have to catch your stinking thinking, the negative stuff you're feeding yourself. You have to pull yourself out of it and say, no, I'm going to actually do some problem solving and critical thinking about this instead of just falling into my emotions. Our ability to quickly think and react in that amygdala part is actually really impressive, but it is uncontrolled, unconscious, unintentional, and involuntary, and totally effortless. It's really easy to be there. And that's why so many of us use it. And we have a lot of mental health problems because of it, because we're not actually paying attention to how we're reacting and behaving. And we can cause a lot of pain for ourselves and people in our lives. That emotion part of our brain, that fight flight, is very critical to our survival. But it's not critical. It's very damaging to our emotional intelligence. Social psychologists actually believe most of the problems, or a lot of them in the world, are due to us using a lot of that quick thinking instead of our controlled thinking. Life has become pretty easy. Everything's at our fingertips. We can jump on the internet and get information. So don't get lazy about how you manage your mental health and the way your brain works. So distractions. When we have automatic decision making, I think sometimes it's really good to have distractions, especially if you have a problem with your temper and anger, or before you respond to that ex-spouse that's just really pissed you off. Walk away. Give yourself time to think. Make yourself be purposeful and get into the prefrontal lobe of your brain to problem solve. Do it on purpose. It's hard work, but you can get there. So information that makes you mad, instead of responding, walk away. You want to scream and cuss, do it in another room, come back, deal with the problem. We respond better when we don't distract ourselves from our emotions and give ourselves time before we respond. You get that nasty text, don't respond right away. Put your phone down, go do something else for an hour or two. Don't prime yourself. Don't sit and ruminate and keep talking about it in your own mind. Find something else to do that actually distracts you. Go listen to a good song, something positive that makes you feel better before you go back and respond. When we go off and we're in automatic pilot and we get off automatic pilot and we actually think things through, we can do a better job at responding. So think about sometimes when we fail at something and in our brain, or we did something wrong. Let's say you have a death of a family member and you're thinking, if only I. And then you finish that sentence and you continually think about that. If only this wouldn't have happened, or if only that wouldn't have happened, or if only I didn't do that. When we are ruminating and keeping that thing going on in our head, and that's a part of our amygdala, we are creating a lot of stress for ourselves. Are you causing toxic stress, which is really bad for your body in all ways? The more we think in this manner of what I could have done, if only I would have done this, the more stress we are causing. We can't change the tragedy. You need to catch yourself doing that negative rumination. Don't roll something around in your mind and keep creating that toxic stress that's going on. When we get caught in that counterfactual reasoning as what it is, something happened, and we just keep trying to, in our brain, change what happened when in fact we can't go back and change it. We just keep thinking it. There's no room for other types of thinking, right? Your prefrontal cortex is not online. So you have to do something, a distraction or something, to get your prefrontal problem solving part of your brain back online. Many times this type of thinking isn't intentional. You have to make a choice to pay attention to your self-talk. Sometimes we want to stop focusing on the negatives, but we get really stuck in it, and it could lead to depression and our life just falling apart. One of the reasons we have the controlled thinking is actually it provides checks and balances on our automatic thinking so that doesn't happen to us. Just like an airplane captain can fly the plane on automatic pilot, he can also flip it back and take control of it when something happens and there's trouble. So we can shut down our automatic thinking when we're purposeful about it and get our controlled thinking back online. You have to practice. It's not going to be easy. You actually have to catch yourself and pay attention to what's going on in your head and what you're saying to yourself about it. So, how successful are we at actually correcting our mistakes, and how can we be taught to do better? One of the approaches to make decisions a little better in our lives is just to be a little humbler about our true reasoning abilities. Often we have a lot more greater confidence in our own judgments than we actually should. That overconfident barrier closes us off to learning and being actually teachable. We don't want to hear someone who doesn't agree with us. We don't want to hear that we're doing it wrong. It feels good to be right. It feels good to be acknowledged and that our beliefs are good. It's pretty painful to be told most of your life is wrong, but we need to really confront ourselves directly. If what you're doing isn't working and you're still living a life that's sad and you hate it, why do you keep doing it? Can you think of a time that you've had an overconfident bias or a current one? I have a question for you to see if you have an overconfident bias. Is there a topic you will not discuss with anybody who does not agree with you? Have you removed people from your life that do not agree with you? If you have, you're living in your amygdala and you have an overconfident bias. We should be able to have conversations with anybody, even if we don't agree with it, because when you're in the prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain, you can problem solve through that and not have all the emotions that go with it. I thank you for coming and talking to me today and listening to my Chuckin Bricks second session. We will have more, and I appreciate you and hope you have a lovely day. Thanks.